All right, let me share something with you. Why are you striving these days? Why are you trying to earn grace? Why are you crying? Let me lift up your face. Just don't turn away. Why? I kind of sound shaky, but here I always want to show you that King James uh, is most often read here according to these guys, and NIV is number 2. So that's interesting. So let's take a look at something in the NIV in John chapter 2, verse 15. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. The Good News Translation. So he made a whip from cords and drove all the animals out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He overturned the tables of the money changers and scattered their coins. Okay, if you're familiar with this event, you're going to notice a problem. If you're not familiar, let me show you in a way that you might be able to see it for yourself. Okay, so let me repeat. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. Right, and good news is consistent with that as well, right? But let's see what it says in Matthew 21. Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. So here, this would imply that he drove out all who were buying and selling. So the ones that were buying and selling in the temple courts were sheep and cattle. He drove all the animals out of the temple. He drove out all who were buying and selling. Jesus went into the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling, and drove all the animals out of the temple, both sheep and cattle. So sheep and cattle were in the temple buying and selling, apparently. Uh, the King James Bible, and Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. But what's the King James say in John 2, verse 15? And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables. Notice the difference here. In John 2:15 does not contradict Matthew 21:12 in the King James, but it certainly does in the Good News and New International. You see the difference, no? And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and oxen. So he drove out all those who were buying and selling. that sold and bought, and the sheep and the oxen. But the NIV says something different. So he made a whip out of the cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. Key word here is both, and over here is and. So he drove out the people and the sheep and the oxen. So he drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. When you put that word both, it insinuates, if you will, that he drove out the sheep and cattle, is what this means when it says he drove all, both sheep and cattle. That's a problem. That's a big problem. I hope you're able to see it